Hello, this is Zahirul Alam. Welcome you all on Frankly Speaking. Today's guest is Lieutenant General Henry C. Stackpole, retired, a true friend of Bangladesh who led a massive relief mission of the United States after devastating cyclone hit Bangladesh on April 29, 1991. He's here on the occasion of 15th anniversary of Operation Sea Angel, a grand humanitarian relief operation. The cyclone called Marian was one of the most catastrophic, vicious natural disasters in recent times, which killed nearly 140,000 people and rendered over 5 million people homeless. A contingency joint task force was immediately formed under the command of the General Stackpole, the then commander of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force based in Japan. We're happy to have with us today the head of the Operation Sea Angel, who is a wonderful person, born in blue-collar family in New Haven, Connecticut, who served the U.S. Marine for 36 years and retired in 1994. He is popularly known as Hank. Welcome, General Henry Stackpole, in our Frankly Speaking show.
Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. General Stackpole, in the wake of the cyclone in Bangladesh, devastating cyclone, the U.S. President directed the U.S. military to extend your humanitarian effort, humanitarian aid to Bangladesh after receiving requests from Bangladesh. So you were called for as the principal of the humanitarian effort, humanitarian drive in Bangladesh. So how you had started your journey?
Well, it started in the Philippines. When the call came that we were to render aid to Bangladesh, I was working in trying to support some difficult situations in the Philippines. I flew immediately to Okinawa and took an Air Force C-141 and a survey liaison team of 24 people, key officers and myself, and flew immediately within 24 hours to Dhaka. At the time, we had been, of course, in a place where we had not heard about the devastation. We could not imagine what it was like. But when I arrived here and started working with the armed forces and with the government and did a quick survey down in the coastal area, it was nothing that I had ever seen before. With the devastation of the winds and the tidal bores, it looked like the surface of the moon. And there was no indication of life readily apparent from the air. It became necessary at that point in time to see what was really needed and how we could work together.
It was a big, gigantic grand relief operations in here. Did you ever experience it before 1991?
Well, I'd been with larger forces that were working on such things as the war in Vietnam and elsewhere, but in a peacetime situation, it was most unusual to have that kind of capability. 15 ships, aircraft of the Sea Stallion, the Sea Knights that we had on board the ships, the Black Hawk helicopters, and then landing craft air cushioned. But the other aspect of it that was most important, and I think the audience should be aware, the other countries that came and provided aid, smaller scale, decided as a result of the transparency with the government and with the ambassadors of those countries, with Ambassador William Milam, who was very heroic in this, allowed us to have what we call an ad hoc coalition. So we had a fire brigade from Japan with 2 helicopters with them. We had Pakistan, the People's Republic of China, India, England, and France. And the decision was made to put them under the operational control, not the command, but the operational control of Sea Angel. And that was a very, very smart move.
Bangladesh, that disaster event was a decisive event in your career. And you said that the American people cannot and do not understand the level and degree of the devastation and the living in some places of the world. But do you think that after hitting of Katrina in the United States, can the American people understand the degree of devastation now?
Well, I think we're more aware of the fact that nature can be very treacherous. Now, there's a difference in the circumstances. Of course, the magnitude of death and the devastation to the livelihood of the lands with the salt pans and aquaculture was significant. Most Westerners cannot comprehend the magnitude of that disaster. But the reason about Katrina, the reason for that I made that comment a moment ago, is that showed a failure of bureaucracy and leadership at that point in time. Here is the greatest, strongest nation in the world, and we admit freely there were major mistakes made that should not have happened. For example, those levees, the dikes, we knew that they were weak. We knew that they could not withstand a 5-category storm, and yet there was a slowness and reaction and perhaps kind of betting that this won't happen. Well, that's the problem that we have around the world, and also here because of your weather conditions and the things that you're exposed to in an annual cycle.
In 2002, a detachment of the 3rd U.S. Marine Expeditionary Force came in Bangladesh and they joined in a non-traditional military exercise with Bangladesh military.
Yes.
And they worked for some unprivileged people and constructed houses. So do you see any prospect of larger cooperation between the strategic cooperation between the military of the two countries?
Oh, I do indeed. As a matter of fact, there are a number of exercises, some at a small level, engineering and tactics and techniques and procedures to work, but there are also exercises in which we are looking at how to respond. Your situation, and I was asked this question by a cadet at the military academy the other day, how can we be prepared for an earthquake because of the fault here? The answer to that is we never know when nature is going to strike. What we need to do is have sufficient readiness to diminish the amount of the impact and to save lives. That means awareness, that means education. It means certain types of equipment that will allow rapid response. But it also means, again, the help of the international community. Sea Angel, despite its loss of life, became the foundation for planning in the proper way to do multinational efforts in support of such disasters. And the recent examples of this, of course, are the tsunami and also the Pakistan earthquake.
But Bangladesh is being painted and has been painting in the international arena, international media, as the sanctuary of the extremism and fundamentalism. But recently, government has been making serious drive to nabbing the extremists. So, do you think that it will help Bangladesh to project its image positively in the outer world?
Oh, I think there is a positive image because of the steps that have been taken. But at the same time, I don't agree with the idea that it's become a center of unrest and fundamentalism. I think the issue in any democracy is all religions should be accepted. The dominant one here is the world of Islam. But I do not follow Dr. Huntington's view that there's a clash of civilizations. What I would like to see is the view of the Quran practiced here to be transferred to the West rather than the fundamentalism of the Arab view translated to the East. And I would hope that somehow that would come about.
Generally, you always used to say that look for new answers and new possibilities. So we'll try to know your philosophies, your ideas, thoughts about the contemporary issues on security concerns. Guest is General Henry C. Stackpole, the hero of Grand Relief Operation in Bangladesh in 1991. General, you are the chairman of Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. So what do you think about the idea of the doctrine of dominance, especially taking into account the role of the United States in different parts of the world and after the end of the Cold War?
I think that one thing that should be noted is that America is a reluctant superpower, and I don't think that we really talk in terms of dominance. There are bilateral relationships, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, that are important to us, but more importantly is this is a globalized world. Globalization is a process. We all have to work together, and there are common elements that are threats to our citizens and our prosperity. What are they? Terrorism, of course, is the number one that we see. Then, of course, we have such things as human trafficking, drug smuggling, money laundering, and environmental degradation. It's considerable because if we go to see wars in the future, they may well be what is called resource wars, distribution of food, water, clean water. And you live in a country that is dominated by water, but not so much of it drinkable, as we well know. And of course, with the tube wells and the arsenic problem, that has to be settled also. So I feel very strongly for the people. And we need to deal with these things. Piracy is still going on in these waters of Asia, the Malacca Straits, the Bay of Bengal, and elsewhere. And that's not acceptable in this day and age. And we have the technology to do it, but we can only do it if we share information and intelligence and work together. Now that's one area where Bangladesh is highly admired. You have the largest amount of people distributed to work from your military forces in peacekeeping operations. I think it helps to make a much more professional military, very definitely, and I have the greatest respect for both the civil servants and for the military, because if it had not been for that.
But one thing regarding Iraq, that there are serious and considerable concern in the international arena about the nuclear enrichment in Iran. But and recently, U.S. Secretary of State already threatened to use force if that in case of non-compliance. But Iran already categorically said that they are not going to stop their nuclear enrichment program. So, do you apprehend any type of military intervention to resolve these issues imminent?
No, I don't see that happening, because the world is such that we can't afford that sort of thing. That's almost the beginning of a World War III. Previously, we were worried about Northeast Asia, about Korea, North Korea particularly. We were worried about China. China, India, the United States are giants in the Asia-Pacific region. We have to work together. I've attended a number of conferences, one in Shanghai just in November, and I see much, much hope. But on the issue of Iraq, it's a split situation in the United States. The question of whether we should or should not have gone into Iraq is a moot point now. The issue is, can we provide sufficient security for Iraq and the people who are caught in the crossfire to finally allow them to get rid of that cancer of terrorism and try to live normal lives. We made some serious miscalculations, in my personal opinion. One of them was how to wage the peace. One of the keys to this world of ours is cultural awareness, and we desperately need to come to see how the other person thinks, walk in their shoes for a few days, for example. That was one of the successes of what we did in Sea Angel, is we came to understand the nature of the people of Bangladesh, and we respected that. There was never an incident at all, and an amazement on the part of our young men and women who participated to know that they could help a country. Poverty is everywhere, and it's one of the most difficult things to overcome, and it hurts a country. Yet it takes a lot of vision and a bureaucracy that is responsive to what's going on. As far as Iran is concerned, I am gratified to see that my government has stepped back and are starting to talk about diplomatic issues. The issue that we have in Iran is a relatively simple one. We have a very militant leadership, and that leadership is making some rather undiplomatic commentaries. I can understand it from the sense of the history that has existed. But by the same token, we cannot answer militancy with militancy. We have to try a diplomatic approach. My belief is that we need a more international protocol on the control of fissile materials and nuclear weapons. We need China, and we need Russia to take part, and we need the UN to have some degree of teeth in doing this. But as long as we stay away from an international protocol, we do not have a legitimate way of approaching the issue. The other thing that Iran can turn around and say, well, look at the United States working with India on nuclear power and the like. Why should they be different than us? Well, the conditions are certainly different if we want to go into the details. But we cannot afford the idea that we are going to go to some nuclear Armageddon. And I believe, my own study of Iran, that the majority of the people in Iran don't really want to go down this road that appears to be what the leadership is looking for. I know there are other issues to be still dealt with, the Palestinian-Israeli relationship. I know that we have the problem that has been a millennium of the differences between Sunni and Shiite, and then the Kurds. It's a very complex issue, and we did not step into it, from my personal opinion, with a full understanding of that nature. So there's a great deal to do. Here, and in Asia as a whole, we see democracy moving along at its own pace, your own economic, your own political speed, which is important. But most importantly, your view of democracy here is wrapped in the Bengali culture. And I think that's particularly important. and we must respect that. Democracy does not have to look like the American model. There are some basic principles, but in the long haul, it is the people who decide how their country is run.
But do you subscribe the idea that when some nations tells that when they own their own nuclear program, that tells the other program is not good? So isn't it a contradictory? Isn't it an idea of an uneven security system in the world?
Oh, I think it is uneven right now, very definitely. I think we have to make an understanding that there are going to be countries that develop nuclear capabilities. What we'd like to do is see that to the benefit of the people with nuclear power, and not the idea that we must arm missiles and be ready to fire at somebody. It is my firm belief that we will not see, after this situation occurring in Iraq, any major conflict among countries that prosper and believe in democracy. But fundamentalism can be a very destroying situation, because at the heart of it is vengeance. At the heart of it is victimization. And those are poisons in the mind of being able to live together and bind our humanity to one another.
But don't you admit that the gap between the rich and poor is widening, and you know that the deprivation gets frustration, and frustration gets anger, and anger gets violence around the world? So
that's a phrase I've used very often, and I agree with that. But I also believe that one of the problems that we face when I talk about the situation of globalization threats with these things that are money laundering, terrorism, and even environmental degradation, they're not dramatic as Cyclone Marion was. Instead, they eat away like rust and like rot until suddenly you turn around and the building falls. We can't allow that to happen. And I agree with what you're saying. But at the same time, the reason, from my point of view, for the gap between rich and poor, and widening even in the richest countries, as we see in our own country, it is because of a bureaucracy that isn't responsive to the needs of the people, and corruption at all levels. My nation is now going through trials on huge corporations that cost the livelihood of many people who invested with the hope of having a better life. Those corporate crooks are as criminal as someone who takes a life on the street, from my point of view.
India and Pakistan joins nuclear club, and do you think that they can make a serious security threat to the to the stability of this region? And in that case, would you suggest any security shield or any collective security pact?
I think that India and Pakistan are coming to a greater understanding. In odd ways, disasters such as the earthquake in Pakistan create a more positive opportunity because they respond and they have accepted Indian support. I think transparency, which I now see going on, and the friends that I've talked to in both countries, scientists, are coming to the understanding there must be control mechanisms and safeguard mechanisms, which they're doing. They have every right to be in the nuclear family, if you will. What we need to do is make sure that we openly have those who are in the nuclear family following a protocol that puts controls on the situation. Unfortunately, there has been sort of a disbandment relating to the reduction of nuclear threats. And you would think after the end of the Cold War that this was supposed to be the century of peace. Unfortunately, we see more people being killed in the crossfires in this so-called time of peace because of ethnic, religious, and separatist differences. We are seeing the situation just to the north of you with Nepal. I am so pleased that the parliament is being reestablished so that the voices of the people may be heard. And the world, in many ways, is looking very, very strongly at your election in January, because that is another proof of the development of the voices of the common people being heard. And you've gone through several relatively successfully. My only regret is that there tends to be too much violence associated with it. And the violence sours the aspect of that vote. One of the joys of a democracy is the vote of a single person given freely of their own conviction. That's sweet. What is sour is when a vote is coerced or bought, and that's difficult. And then again, we come to corruption And that creates the greater gap between the so-called haves and have-nots.
So before winding up, we would love to know something about your family life. I know your wife is Vivian. She is an interior designer and Austrian and Chinese descent. So would you share something about your family life in short?
I am married to the love of my life, and I tell you, one of the things that she said, only half jokingly, is that I was an enlightened barbarian because I had the wisdom to marry a Chinese. No, I feel very strongly that perhaps we represent part of the globalization because we have mixed blood children, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. All these nations, that, particularly out here in Asia, tend to be a mix of various tribal groups and ethnic groups, and that's the future of this world.
Dear viewers, the massive humanitarian relief mission General Stackpole led in the wake of devastating cyclone was a shining and defining moment in US-Bangladesh bilateral relations. It is well worth of commemorating. It reflects the strong spirit of friendship and cooperation between the two nations. A highly decorated, intellectual, operational of Marine Corps, Lieutenant General, now at his 71, still recollects his memory and maintains his every good wishes for the people of Bangladesh. Thank you, General Stackpole, for joining our show on Frankly Speaking.
Dhanabad Alam.
Thank you. Dear viewers, we thank you indeed and welcome you to join us again in our next program on Frankly Speaking. Till then, do take care. Bye-bye.